Hey guys, tonight I'm going to take you through the door of time to a world that's been asleep for thousands of years. You will never survive here. So before you join me, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you're really enjoying the journey. Tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now turn off the lights, curl up in your warm blankets, and let's start our journey together. You stand at the drawbridge of a medieval fortress, and the night smells of smoke and iron. The wooden planks beneath your feet are slick with frost. Your breath turns white in the air. Ahead, two guards shift in the glow of their torches, stamping their boots, muttering about the cold. They're wrapped in wool and fur, but still their noses glow red. Their fingers stiffen around their spears. A great door groans open. Inside is a narrow passage lined with stone blocks so ancient that they seem to breathe. The cold doesn't stop at the threshold. It follows you in, seeps into your bones. The sound changes. Outside the wind howled. Inside it whispers. The smell here is unmistakable. Wood smoke, tallow candles, and damp wool. Someone has just thrown another log on the fire, and the air blooms briefly with the scent of resin. But it doesn't last. The stone swallows it. Every wall of this place holds centuries of winter. You follow a servant through the passage. Her breath trembles like steam. She carries a candle, its light shivering on the walls. "Keep close," she whispers, "or the dark will swallow you." You do. The floor is uneven. Centuries of footsteps have hollowed the stones. As you pass the great hall, you hear a dog bark once, then curl back to sleep beside the hearth. The fire crackles. Shadows stretch across the rush-covered floor. A tapestry stirs, its threads glinting faintly. You glimpse kings, saints, battles, all frozen in fabric, waiting for warmth that never truly comes. This castle, like all others of its kind, was built for war, not for comfort. Its walls could resist catapults and men, but not the weather. The cold is an army that never retreats. It creeps through the tiniest openings, lays siege to every room. You notice how your breath fogs in front of you. The servant laughs softly. "That's how we know we're still alive." She gestures toward a stairwell twisting upward like a frozen serpent. "The Lord sleeps up there," she says. "Closer to heaven, they say, but colder too." As you climb, you touch the wall. It's wet. Condensation gathers like tears on the stones. Each drop glistens in the candlelight, then freezes again. Somewhere above, the bell tolls the hour. Slow, mournful, the heartbeat of the night. In the silence that follows, you can almost hear the castle thinking. The creak of wood, the drip of water, the faint sigh of the wind under a door. Every sound is deliberate, as if the building itself is alive and slightly tired of being awake. You stop on the landing. Below, the firelight flickers through an archway, painting orange shapes on the floor. Beyond it lies the hall where people will gather, servants huddling for warmth, soldiers whispering gossip, a child asleep beside the embers. Life clings to the fire like moths to a candle, and above, where you stand now, the darkness is unbroken. Here begins the long experiment of human endurance, to sleep in a place colder than stone, to outlast the night with breath and prayer. The servant opens a door. The hinges shriek. Inside is a bed, enormous, curtained, layered with furs. The air smells of wax and ash. "This," she says, "is what we call comfort." You reach out to touch the bedpost. The wood is smooth from centuries of hands. The sheets, linen and wool, are heavy. When you lift them, a faint warmth escapes, the ghost of a previous sleeper. Outside, the wind howls again. and you realise that in this world, warmth isn't a luxury, it's faith. Every fire, every blanket, every breath is an act of hope. The castle survives because its people believe it can. You look once more at the servant's face, dimly lit by the candle. Her eyes glint like tiny embers. "Sleep well," she says, "if you can." Then she leaves, closing the door softly behind her. The room settles. The only sound is the crackle of a fading flame. You crawl beneath the heavy covers, feel the rough weave of linen, the faint scent of smoke in the furs. The wind claws at the shutters, but the bed holds you, a fragile fortress of warmth against the dark. For a moment you wonder if you'll ever stop feeling cold. Then slowly you do, and as you drift towards sleep you realise this is how they survived winter. Not through strength or magic, but through patience, through fire and faith and the soft, stubborn rhythm of the human heart. The night stretches on, the castle breathes, and you too become part of its dream. The walls are older than memory. They rise above you like cliffs, each block of limestone cold enough to numb your fingertips. These walls were never meant for sleep, they were built. You stand in the corridor where the air doesn't move, the stones drink the heat from your body, and the silence hums softly, like something breathing just behind the wall. A draught snakes through the arrow slits, thin vertical cuts where archers once aimed, now serving as perfect tunnels for winter air. When the wind blows, they whistle mournfully. You trace the mortar lines with your hand. It feels slick, almost alive. The servant from last night told you, the cold here has bones, and she wasn't wrong. You can feel it pressing against your spine, seeping under your cloak, an uninvited guest. The corridor opens into a chamber, wide and echoing. The ceiling disappears into darkness. No tapestry hangs here. The walls are bare, pale as bone. You can imagine the lord who ordered it built centuries ago, proud of his fortress's strength, never imagining that his descendants would shiver in it every winter. Some tried to outwit the cold. Over the generations they hung thick tapestries to trap air, spreading them across the walls like woolen armour. Beneath your feet straw rushes are scattered, part carpet, part insulation. Mixed with crushed herbs, lavender, thyme, sweet flag. They softened steps and sweetened the damp smell of stone. Each time the rushes were replaced, they brought in the scent of the fields, as if summer itself were being carried indoors. You crouch and touch the rushes. They're damp, of course, always damp. The stone beneath them sweats when the fires burn below. Moisture curls into the air, ghosting against your face. In one corner stands a narrow shaft, the garderobe. Once a medieval marvel of sanitation, it is now just another crack for the wind to invade. Its draught rises straight from the moat. Some poor servant probably drew the short straw and had to clean it each morning. You imagine that. The freezing fingers, the smell, the half-frozen bucket of lime. Luxury, you whisper, half smiling. It's easy to forget that castles were never homes in the modern sense. They were statements of power, of fear, of faith. Comfort was a side effect if it happened at all. Every window was a potential weakness, every door a point of defence. Warmth was a constant negotiation with architecture itself. You picture a mason in the 13th century, hands chapped raw, stacking these stones one by one under a leaden sky. Did he think of the people who would sleep inside, or did he only dream of finishing before frostbite set in? Above you, faintly, you hear a soft rhythm, the crack of settling timbers. Even the wood complains about the cold. The sound echoes down the passage, mingling with the faint drip of water from the roof. Somewhere outside a crow calls. In later centuries, when kings grew softer and winters harsher, Carpenters were hired to build wooden bower houses within the stone halls. Little houses inside houses, walls lined with oak panels to trap warmth. They looked strange. Delicate wooden rooms nested in the belly of a fortress, but they worked, for a few at least. The poor still slept in the great hall, near the dogs and embers, where smoke choked the air but frost could not reach. You pass your hand over one wall where a tapestry still clings. The colours are faded, crimson turned to rust, blue to grey. The threads smell faintly of lanolin. Once this was a scene of triumph, knights and angels stitched in silk. Now it's a blanket for a dying fire. You stop beside a narrow window slit. Through it, you can just see the courtyard, white with snow, horses steaming as they stamp. The smithy fire sparks like a red star in the distance. You imagine how the air must feel out there. Sharper, cleaner, maybe kinder than the breathless cold inside these walls. It's strange. The same stones that kept out armies now imprison the living. The castle is a paradox of survival, strong enough to defy war, yet powerless against the weather. Every winter it waged its quiet, endless battle with frost. Even kings couldn't sleep warm, you murmur, half to yourself. There's an old saying, the castle protects the body, but not the bones. The stone defends you from blades, but never from the creeping cold that sinks into marrow. Somewhere behind you the corridor door groans. A servant slips in carrying a torch. The flame stutters, casting quicksilver shadows. She smiles weakly. Don't linger, she warns. The walls bite. And indeed you can feel them closing in, each surface radiating chill, each draught whispering through invisible cracks. The fire below is too far away to matter. You pull your cloak tighter and step back toward the stairs, where warmth still breathes faintly upward. Before you leave, you look back once more. The torchlight flutters over the stone, making the wall seem alive, shifting, breathing, almost listening. These walls have stood for centuries. They've heard wars, weddings, prayers, laughter and screams. They'll outlive you too, but tonight they're only stone and silence, holding the memory of 1,000 winters that never end. The great hall was the heart of every castle, though in winter it beats slow and smoky. You step inside and the first thing you notice is the colour of the air. Brown with soot, thick with the smell of roasted meat and damp wool. The hall is vast, the ceiling disappearing into shadows. Flames leap on the open hearth, not in a neat fireplace but on a raised stone platform in the middle of the floor. The smoke curls upward and spreads across the beams before finding its way out through a hole in the roof. It never really leaves. This is where everyone lives when the cold deepens. Nobles, servants, guards, travellers. The hierarchy is visible in their seating. The lord's table near the fire, the servants against the walls, the dogs wherever they please. You hear the clatter of trenchers, the soft grunt of a pig turning on a spit, and the low murmur of conversation about weather, debt, and God. The air itself feels alive, trembling with smoke and warmth and breath. Someone throws a log on the fire and sparks explode upward, swirling in gold and red. For a moment the whole hall looks enchanted. Faces lit from below, shadows dancing on the walls like restless ghosts. Then the log settles, the flames shrink, and the light dies back to a soft, flickering heartbeat. You sit down on a bench near the edge of the firelight. The bench is hard, the air cold even here. You understand now why every tapestry in the castle smells faintly of smoke. It is the scent of survival. The people here have learned that comfort is not the absence of hardship, but its disguise. The lord of the castle sits in his carved chair, wrapped in fur, He drinks spiced wine from a silver cup, hypocras sweetened with cinnamon and cloves, brought from faraway lands that have never seen snow. The cup steams in his hands like a small sun. Beside him, a minstrel tunes his lute. The melody is soft, circular, as if it could play forever without reaching an end. And yet, the fire dominates everything. It is not just warmth. It is control. Whoever commands the hearth commands life itself. In older castles like this one, there were no chimneys, only central hearths that smoke the air black. The walls, the beams, even the skin of the people all carried that dark sheen. It wasn't until the late 13th century that engineers began to carve true flues through the walls. In 1289, Edward then ordered the construction of Conwy Castle in Wales, one of the first fortresses to feature enclosed hearths with stone chimneys. This technological miracle finally allowed fire to breathe, but not here, not yet. The smoke in this hall is a living thing. It hangs low, curling around the torches, finding your throat, stinging your eyes. You can taste it, like iron, like history. The servants have learned to live with it. They eat quickly, heads tilted slightly upward, blinking through the haze. The dogs have learned too. They lie with their noses pressed against the rushes, seeking the faintest draught from under the door. Only the children seem unbothered. They play in the shadows, chasing each other between the benches, their laughter soft as moth wings. A woman nearby begins to hum a tune. It's one of those songs that sounds like a prayer until the rhythm gives it away. It's old, older than the hall itself, about St. Bridget and her perpetual flame, the sacred fire that never went out. The Irish once believed that her nuns tended it for centuries, a living symbol of warmth through endless winters. Whether it was ever real or only a legend, no one knows. The song, at least, has survived. The flame of St. Bridget in Kildare, said to have burned for over 1,000 years before being extinguished in the Reformation. You listen to the melody drift up into the rafters, mingling with the smoke. For a moment it feels as though the entire hall is breathing in time with it. The cold is still there, crouching at the edges, but the sound and the smell and the soft light create a kind of truce. A guard nearby makes a joke about smoke curing meat and lungs alike. Everyone laughs, not because it's funny, but because laughter feels warm. The Lord smiles faintly. The minstrel plucks another note. Someone snores by the fire. The dog twitches in its sleep, dreaming perhaps of spring. You look up again. The rafters vanish into darkness. The flicker of the flames paints the ceiling in shifting gold, and for a heartbeat you could believe that warmth was winning. Then a gust of wind slips through a crack in the door, the fire bends and cold floods back in, uninvited but inevitable. The illusion breaks, the hall exhales. For a few hours more they'll huddle together in this man-made glow, pretending it's enough to hold back the night. And perhaps it is. For in these castles survival is not measured in seasons, but in fires that refuse to die before morning. The stairwell coils upward like a stone serpent. You hold the torch higher, and the walls shine with moisture. The stones here are older, rougher, pitted from centuries of fingers tracing the same climb. Each step is uneven, some worn deep as bowls, others sharp as teeth. The cold changes as you rise. It doesn't just surround you, it seeps into you, settling behind your ribs like another heart that beats slower than your own. The higher you climb, the thinner the warmth becomes. You pass narrow windows, slits no wider than a hand, where moonlight cuts through in silver lines. The air that pours through them smells of snow and iron. Somewhere above, a door creaks. A draught snakes down the stairs, carrying with it the faints you reach the upper chambers. Here the silence is immense. The sounds of laughter, the clatter of dishes, the barking of dogs, all swallowed by thick stone and heavy air. You push open a wooden door and a small chamber unfolds before you. The walls are draped with embroidered cloth stiff with age. Their faded reds and golds shimmer in the torchlight. A brazier glows faintly in the corner, but the bed dominates the room, high as a throne. Furs piled thick, sheets of linen so tightly woven they gleam like frost. You lift one edge, and warmth seeps out, a fragile ghost of the fire that once lived here. The Lord's bed is both fortress and coffin, a monument to endurance. Even kings slept in their armour of cloth and fur. In some castles they try to cheat the cold by building inner chambers, small wooden rooms inside the great halls, lined with planks to trap heat. These were called bower houses, little wooden boxes of comfort inside a sea of stone. Later, in the 15th century, German craftsmen introduced the tiled stove, an ingenious contraption of clay tiles that stored heat for hours after the fire went out. To sleep beside one was to know a warmth that felt like luxury itself. The Kachelofen, or tile stove, first appeared in alpine regions during the 14th century and spread through Central Europe by the 15th century. Some were so efficient they could heat an entire chamber with a single evening's fire. You move closer to the window. Frost has bloomed on the glass, curling into delicate white veins. Through it you can just see the courtyard below, dark shapes moving, servants carrying buckets of water that steam faintly in the moonlight. Their footsteps crunch softly on the snow. The sound reaches you faintly through the walls, muffled by distance, like a heartbeat beneath layers of cloth. You imagine what it was like to live here through a whole winter, week after week of grey skies and freezing stone, where every fire feels like defiance and every night lasts too long. There is a folk tale from the northern marches about a woman who lived in a tower like this. She is said to weave her breath into her tapestries each winter, so that when spring came, the fabric would glow faintly with trapped warmth. The villagers called her the Fire Maiden. Her tapestries were never burned, they said, because to destroy them would release her ghost back into the wind. A northern European legend of the Fire Maiden, inspired by recorded tales of enchanted weavings in Scandinavian oral tradition. You glance again at the tapestries on the wall. They ripple faintly as the draught moves through the room, as if someone unseen is breathing just behind them. Maybe that's all folklore is, a way to explain why the air still moves when no one's there. The brazier pops, a spark jumps, and the shadows dance across the walls. For a moment they resemble figures, servants, soldiers, perhaps even that woman from the story, frozen mid-motion. The cold makes everything feel alive and dead at once. Historians still debate whether people in the Middle Ages ever truly felt warm in the way we think of it now. Was warmth a physical sensation or a spiritual one? Was it enough to feel safe by the fire, or did it mean something deeper, the certainty that morning would come again? There's no answer, only the evidence of firewood accounts and smoke-stained beams, of people who kept living through the frost because they had no other choice. You sit on the edge of the bed. The sheets sigh beneath your weight, releasing a faint scent of beeswax and smoke. The curtain beside you moves slightly, though the air is still. The torch in your hand flickers, shrinks, and finally steadies. For a long time you listen to nothing, the hollow quiet of stone and snow. Then, slowly you exhale, and the air fogs before you like a ghost leaving your body. Outside, the wind sighs again through the arrow slits. The walls answer with a soft groan, and you realize that in this place every breath is a negotiation with winter. every exhale a promise that you're still here, still alive, still waiting for warmth that may never fully come. The bed here is not furniture, it's a fortress. You pull back the curtain, and the scent of wool, smoke and sleep rises like a slow exhale. Linen sheets, coarse and cold to the touch, lie beneath layers of blankets and furs. The mattress is thick with feathers, resting on ropes that must be tightened each night. That's where the old phrase comes from: sleep tight. You can hear the faint creak of the bedstead when you sit. The ropes stretch beneath your weight, straining like the rigging of a ship. Every bed in the castle, from the lord's chamber to the scullion's cot, speaks the same language of survival, layer upon layer, tied, stuffed, covered and tucked. Sleep is not rest, it's engineering. Servants move quietly in the hall carrying bed warmers, small metal pans filled with glowing coals. They slide them between the sheets, swishing them back and forth until the linen steams faintly. It's dangerous work. Too long in one place, and the sheets catch fire. Too short, and the warmth fades before the sleeper lies down. One of the maids tells you that sometimes they used bricks or stones instead, wrapped in cloth to stop them from burning the skin. In poorer homes, even baked potatoes or heated soapstone would do. Whatever held heat was precious. In the deepest frost, people slept beside their dogs or chickens, anything alive enough to give off warmth. Archaeological records from Yorkshire and Bavaria confirm the widespread use of soapstone or terracotta bedstones during the late Middle Ages. In households without metal pans, heated stones were placed in cloth sacks beneath the bedding. You run your hand over the fur coverlet. Fox, perhaps, or marten. Its hairs coarse but softening under your palm. The bedposts are carved with flowers and strange creatures, griffins, serpents, vines. They rise toward the canopy, where the curtain cords dangle like ropes in a tent. When you draw them closed, the world vanishes. The curtain traps not only heat but also sound. Inside, it's another realm, small, muffled, warm, and utterly private. In this world, privacy is a kind of luxury. Families, servants, and guards all live within shouting distance of each other. But behind these curtains for a few hours, one can breathe without being seen. The fire in the brazier flickers, and the shadows shift. You can imagine someone lying here centuries ago, a noblewoman perhaps, her hair unbound, her hands folded on her chest. The air around her smells of tallow and smoke. Outside, frost blooms silently on the window glass. She pulls the curtain tighter, not against intruders, but against the cold itself. You lie back, and the feather bed sighs beneath you. It's soft, but there's a peculiar chill trapped inside the layers, the ghost of yesterday's frost. You pull the fur up to your chin and close your eyes. For a moment, it's easy to forget where you are. The air is thick, still, almost womb-like, but the quiet doesn't last. The bed creaks again, this time from movement in the room above. Someone else is turning in their sleep. You hear a faint cough, then a muffled sneeze. In a castle, even private moments echo through the walls. Historians still debate whether medieval people actually slept through the night as we do. Evidence suggests they didn't. Records and diaries mention first sleep and second sleep, divided by an hour or two of wakefulness. Some prayed, some talked quietly, others tended the fire or even visited their neighbours' beds. Sleep, like warmth, was a communal affair. You smile at the thought. The entire castle breathing in two rhythms, rising and falling like tides through the night. A servant enters quietly to check the brazier. Her face glows orange in the firelight. She lifts the lid, stirs the coals and whispers a charm under her breath, something about keeping frost spirits away. You pretend to sleep, listening. Her voice is low and rhythmic, almost a lullaby. Charms against frost and night spirits appear in several 14th century manuscripts, often Christian prayers disguised as protective rhymes. When she leaves, the door clicks shut and the silence returns, soft and absolute. You pull the curtain closer, feeling the faint breath of warmth clinging to the air. The scent of burning charcoal lingers, sweet and metallic. In the darkness, your mind drifts. You think about how every person who ever slept here fought the same enemy. Not poverty, not plague, not war, but cold. The one thing no castle could ever conquer. The curtain brushes your cheek as it moves slightly in the draught. You listen. The distant creak of beams, the crack of ice outside, the steady pop of the brazier. Each sound feels ancient, as though it's been repeating forever. Then something soft presses against your feet. You freeze, then smile. It's a cat slipping under the coverlet, purring like a tiny engine. Even now, in this century, in this place, it seems that nothing warms the heart quite like that small vibrating sound. Cats were often allowed to sleep in noble chambers, not as pets, but as pest control. Their unintended gift, warmth. You breathe slowly. The cat shifts, curls tighter and sighs. The brazier glows dimly, the curtain sways and the night deepens. For all the power and splendour outside, this tiny island of heat, breath and fur is where humanity truly survives. A bed that creaks like a ship, a stone that glows for an hour, a cat that hums through the dark. It's not comfort, it's endurance, and somehow that's enough. Morning comes late in winter, and even when it does, it's grey. You wake to the sound of boots on stone, buckets clanking, voices echoing through the corridor. The air feels heavier than sleep itself. The brazier has gone cold. A faint crust of frost has formed on the edge of the curtain where your breath met the night air. You push it aside and sit up, blinking. The fireless room smells of linen, tallow, and the sharp tang of cold iron. Outside the chamber door, the castle is already stirring. The servants have been awake for hours, scraping ice from the courtyard well, breaking frozen barrels open with axes. In the kitchens below, someone is cursing at a stubborn chimney. You can almost hear the sound of wet logs refusing to catch, the sputtering hiss that makes everyone's shoulders tense. When you step into the hallway, the chill hits like a slap. Every surface, stone, iron, wood, feels alive with cold. You see your breath float before you like pale smoke. The corridor walls sweat with condensation that freezes again before it can fall. Even the rushes underfoot crunch softly, stiff with frost. Someone passes carrying a pail of ashes to scatter across the icy steps. Another carries a bundle of firewood so thin it looks like kindling. Fuel is precious this time of year. Even a rich lord's stores can dwindle dangerously by February. There's an old saying, "When the firewood goes, so goes the faith." In the kitchen, the air is alive again, not warm exactly, but full of effort. The cook's breath rises like steam. A pot boils slowly on the great hearth, its contents grey and indistinct. A servant drops in a lump of salted meat and stirs. The scent is sour and comforting at once. This stew has no recipe. It's everything left that hasn't yet spoiled. Contemporary household accounts from the 14th century show that winter kitchens relied heavily on preserved foods, salted beef, dried peas, pickled vegetables, until Lent, when meat was forbidden and fish dominated the pot. You take a seat near the edge of the hearth, where the smoke is thickest but the air feels alive. The heat doesn't spread, it just pools like water, so close you could cup it in your hands. A dog lies nearby, stretched out to absorb the last warmth of the fire. The cook, a round woman with a reddened nose, ladles you a bowl of the morning pottage. It tastes like earth and salt and faintly of smoke, like survival itself. You eat slowly, watching the fire struggle and spit. When the wood burns out, someone will rake through the ashes, hoping for one ember to carry to the next hearth. There's a strange intimacy in mornings like this. Everyone in the castle depends on everyone else to keep the fire alive. The cook for the woodcutters, the guards for the torches, the lord for the servants. Without that chain, warmth collapses. On the far side of the kitchen, a boy is hammering ice from a pitcher. His hands are blue, his breath sharp in the air. The cook scolds him gently, handing him a scrap of wool to wrap around the handle. He grins, teeth chattering, and keeps working. Children learn early that a cold is not something to fear, it's a teacher. Historians still debate whether the so-called Little Ice Age truly began in the late medieval period, but the winters recorded in chronicles were brutal enough. Between 1300 and 1350, crops failed from frost across northern Europe. Rivers froze so solid that people built taverns on the Thames. Some chroniclers wrote that birds fell mid-flight, their wings too heavy with ice. The term Little Ice Age was coined much later, but records from 14th century monasteries in England and France describe decades of colder, wetter winters than in earlier centuries, the beginning, perhaps, of that long climatic shift. You think of that as the fire finally takes. The wood catches, the room glows, and the colour returns to everyone's faces. Steam rises from the pots again, golden in the dim light. For a moment, life feels normal. You can almost forget how fragile it all is. That every comfort depends on a few sparks, a few logs, and hands that never stop working. A young scullion jokes that the castle should install chimneys like the bishop's house in Lincoln. Everyone laughs, even though they know it's not possible. Chimneys are expensive, dangerous to build and prone to collapse. Fire in its freedom feels safer. Besides, the smoke keeps the flies away, they say. The boy from before looks up from his bucket and grins, and the ghosts too. The kitchen bursts into laughter. Maybe that's why every castle still smokes, to remind the dead they aren't welcome near the living. Medieval people often attributed protective powers to household smoke, believing it deterred spirits or demons, a superstition that lingered even as chimney building spread in later centuries. The laughter fades, and everyone goes back to work. The cook hums an old hymn, the boy whistles, the dog sighs. The fire crackles on, and you realise as you finish your bowl that warmth here is not a gift, it's a discipline. Something earned through repetition, through waking early and stirring embers, through laughter shared before dawn. Somewhere far above in the Lord's chamber the curtains will be drawn back, the fir will shiver in the draught, the coals will glow again, and another day will begin. The castle exhales its mist and life continues slow and steady against the season. Outside, snow falls soundlessly, covering everything, towers, roofs, ashes, in the softest white surrender. By midday the castle has found its rhythm, a slow, muffled kind of movement, as if the whole world were padded in wool. The sun never truly breaks through. It glows weakly behind a veil of mist, painting everything the colour of pewter. You can see your breath even indoors. Somewhere, a bell tolls from the chapel, the sound heavy and damp, swallowed by fog before it reaches the fields. The corridors feel narrower in daylight. The light doesn't warm, it only makes the cold visible. In some corners, Frost blooms like lace along the stones. You run your gloved hand across it and watch the pattern vanish, leaving your fingertips wet. It's beautiful and utterly indifferent. You find the laundress near the back courtyard, sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her skin raw and pink from the cold water. She stands beside a half-frozen trough, breaking the ice with a wooden paddle before dunking linen sheets into the grey water. Steam rises faintly around her wrists, but her breath is visible too, mingling with it. She tells you she boils the worst of the stains off first. The rest she beats clean with lye and ash. When the wash freezes before it can dry, she hangs it indoors, near the kitchen or under the stairs, where the air is smoky but at least not solid. It smells like soup sometimes, she says, laughing softly. Medieval laundresses often used a mixture of wood ash and urine to bleach linen, an ammonia-based method effective but harsh. The lye was rinsed in icy water, often in winter streams or castle troughs. You thank her, though she shrugs as if to say, "This is nothing special." The daily war with cold, dirt and dampness isn't heroism. It's just life. She wraps her arms around herself and glances at the clouds. If it snows again, we'll run out of soap ash. Her tone isn't fearful, just factual. The way someone might note the weather or the time of day. You leave her there, her figure fading into the white haze, and cross the yard to the stables. The air smells of hay, manure and warm breath. A mercy after the stone chill. Horses stamp and snort in their stalls, their flanks steaming faintly. The stable hands have thrown extra blankets over them, old cloaks cut to fit, fastened with rope. A stable boy grins at you, his cheeks bright red, his nose dripping. He holds up a small clay jar filled with a foul-smelling paste, a mixture of animal fat, soot and herbs. For the hooves, he explains, stops the frostbite. You're not sure if it works, but the horses seem grateful for the attention. One of them turns its head and exhales a warm cloud into your face. You can almost feel it sink into your skin. It's strange. In a world of stone and iron, warmth often comes from fur and flesh. The castle's true furnace is alive, its people, its beasts, its breath. You pause to listen. Outside, the wind moans faintly through the arrow slits, but in here, the sound softens to a low hum. A chicken clucks somewhere overhead, a stable hand sneezes, the horses chew. The rhythm of survival. In a corner, a girl feeds the cats. A handful of scraps tossed into a wooden bowl. They dart out of the shadows, sleek and silent. Keeps the rats out of the grain, she says. You nod. You've already met one of their cousins under your bed last night. There's an old superstition among the servants that cats can see ghosts, which makes them the first to flee if a death is coming. So far, they seem content. It's a good sign. Medieval people often viewed cats as omens, sometimes demonic, sometimes divine. In English folk belief, a cat leaving the hearth without reason foretold a coming death. Back in the hall, the fire has burned low again. Someone tosses a green log onto it, and it hisses instead of flames. Smoke billows upward, thick and sharp. A few people cough. One jokes that the castle ghosts have returned. Another replies, "Let them warm themselves if they can." You smile faintly, rubbing your hands together. The smoke stings your eyes, but it also means life. The castle is breathing again. Historians still debate whether smoke itself was seen as cleansing or simply unavoidable. Some argue that the darkness on the beams and the sting in the throat were accepted as holy marks, signs of a household alive and blessed by fire. Others think it was just a resignation. But either way, the medieval world lived in a haze. You look up at the rafters, blackened from centuries of smoke. and wonder how many winters they've seen. The smell of pitch and soot seeps into everything, into cloth, skin, bread. The taste of warmth itself is slightly bitter. A servant brings you a mug of small ale, thin, sour, barely fermented. It tastes faintly of bread and smoke. Everyone drinks it, even children. Water freezes, beer doesn't. You sip slowly, feeling it settle like a memory. The day drags on. Outside, the snow thickens, covering the stables, the walls, the world. Inside, the fire smoulders and refuses to die. When the bell tolls again for the evening prayers, you stand by the door and look back at the hall. The air is gold now, thick with smoke and dust. The faces around the hearth glow faintly like lanterns. The cats have curled into the ashes, the dogs stretch and sigh. And for a moment, a single, flickering moment, the castle feels alive, not as a monument, but as something breathing, fragile and human. The afternoon sinks quickly into grey, the kind that swallows both time and colour. The servants move like ghosts through the corridors, their footsteps softened by rushes and cold. In the chapel, someone rings a small bell, and its sound drifts faintly through the stairwell, distant, metallic, and slow. The castle prepares, once again, for the long night ahead. You follow the smell of smoke and herbs to a narrow room off the main hall, a place the servants call the warming room. It's little more than a stone alcove with a brazier and a table cluttered with jars, candles, and bundles of dried plants. A woman sits there in the half-dark, grinding something with a pestle. The rhythmic sound of stone on stone echoes softly in the walls. She looks up and smiles, her fingers stained green and brown. "For the joints," she says, nodding toward the bowl. The scent is sharp and earthy. Mustard seed, garlic, rosemary, maybe vinegar. She dips a cloth in it and wrings it out, steam rising in little white curls. Rub it in before the cold sets, keeps the pain away. You can smell the truth of it. The air in here feels different, heavy with warmth, with the ghosts of fire and medicine. Medieval salves for winter ailments often combined warming herbs like mustard, ginger and rue with animal fat or vinegar. Manuscripts such as the Leech Book of Bald describe mixtures meant to chase the cold from the bones. She gestures toward a wooden shelf lined with clay bottles and bundles tied with twine. Some for fever, some for sleep, she says, some for luck. You notice a few tiny charms hanging by the wall. Dried rowan berries, a horseshoe nail, a scrap of parchment marked with a cross. Protection, it seems, is part of every cure. "Do they work?" you ask. She shrugs, smiling faintly. "Sometimes the cure is belief." Her eyes flicker toward the window where frost creeps along the glass. "And belief is warmth." She hands you a small cloth packet filled with something that smells of sage and smoke. "Keep it by your pillow," she says, "for good sleep." You thank her and step back into the hall, the air instantly colder, emptier. The castle is quieter now. Somewhere a door slams against the wind. The faint hum of life contracts. Fires dying down, voices fading. The day folds inward. As you walk, you pass a servant with a stone jug of water. He moves carefully, both hands around the handle as though it holds gold. "From the cistern," he says proudly. You can see a faint skin of ice floating on top. Water itself becomes treasure when every drop must be hacked from frost. Historians still debate how people managed the dampness that plagued these walls. The problem wasn't only the cold, but what it left behind. Condensation dripping from the ceiling, mould blooming where fire met frost, straw bedding rotting slowly in the corners. For every hour of warmth, there was a price in damp and smoke. Some chroniclers claimed castles were unbearably cold, while others describe them as close and airless. Archaeologists suggest both were true. The battle between moisture and fire never ended. You climb another staircase, narrow and twisting. The stones are slick, worn smooth by centuries of boots. At the top, a small door stands ajar. You push it open, and a rush of warm air greets you, warm but heavy with smoke. Inside, 3 servants sit on the floor, rubbing their hands over heated stones wrapped in cloth. They smile at you and offer one. It feels astonishingly warm, almost too much. The heat seeps slowly through the fabric, into your palms, into your bones. For a brief moment you understand why warmth was once considered divine. In many castles, servants heated small stones or bricks in the fire, wrapped them in linen, and passed them among themselves before bed. Some carried them into the chapel, believing the warmth itself was blessed. One of the young men hums a tune, soft, rhythmic, wordless. Another joins in. The melody rises and falls like breath. It sounds like a prayer without words, or perhaps just a way to stay awake while the world outside freezes. When the last of the heat fades from the stone, they wrap it again and return it to the brazier. You realize that this small ritual, warming, passing, sharing, is the quiet engine of survival. The castle doesn't simply endure the winter, it negotiates with it, night after night, ember by ember. Before you leave, one of the servants chuckles. If you can't find warmth, he says, borrow someone else's. He gestures toward the brazier, toward his friends, toward the faint halo of smoke. That's how we last till spring. Outside the chamber, the corridor feels colder than ever. The smell of herbs clings to your sleeves. You touch the little packet the healer gave you. It's still warm from her hands. The torch flickers as you walk, its flame small but defiant. The air hums with silence. Somewhere, deep in the walls, water drips, steady as a heartbeat. You pause for a moment at a narrow window, looking out at the snow. It falls endlessly, soundlessly, covering the world in a kind of peace that's both beautiful and cruel. And you realize, warmth here isn't comfort, it's communion. It exists only when shared, only when tended, only when believed in, like faith, like hope, like the slow fire that keeps the castle alive. Night returns early, swallowing the courtyard in blue-grey silence. The snow that fell all afternoon has built itself into soft hills along the walls, muting every sound. You can almost hear your own heartbeat over the hush. A torch sputters as you pass, hissing in protest at the cold. Inside, the castle breathes differently after sunset. The walls seem to tighten, the corridors narrower, the air heavier with smoke. Fires roar again to life, and the smell of burning wood clings to the fabric of everything. Clothes, hair, even the bread. The great hall glows faintly through the archway ahead. You step inside and find it transformed. The day's grey has become gold. Torches flicker in their sconces, candles drip on the tables, and the hearth burns so bright it looks alive. People gather closer than before, guards, servants, even the Lord himself. The sound of laughter is muffled by exhaustion, but still it exists. The fire makes equals of everyone equal for a little while. Someone strikes a note on a lute. The tune is low and steady, a kind of music that doesn't demand attention but fills the air like warmth. The conversation ebbs around it, stories half told, songs half remembered. This is how winter passes, not with triumph, but with rhythm. A woman near the fire tells a story about a frozen knight who slept beneath the snow for 100 years. When spring came, she says, he woke and could no longer tell if he was alive or dreaming. The others chuckle softly. They've all known that kind of winter. Variations of the sleeping night myth appear across medieval Europe. From Germany's Kiefhäuser legend to Wales's Arthurian caves, symbolizing endurance through long winters and the promise of return. You watch their faces in the firelight. The flames smooth away the centuries. They could be anyone, anywhere, in any year. The smell of wax and wood smoke mingles with the faint sweetness of mead. Someone opens a cask of ale. It foams, golden and alive like sunlight trapped in a cup. A servant slips by with a tray of roasted chestnuts. You take one, feeling its heat sting your fingertips. When you bite into it, the taste is smoky and soft. A small miracle. A man sitting across from you tells another story, this one darker. About a winter so cold that a river froze around a monk mid-sermon, his voice turning to frost before it reached his audience. The others laugh again, but quieter this time. Perhaps they believe it a little. Historians still debate whether these tales were metaphors or memories. Some say they reflect the climatic reality of the Great Frost of 13 and 17, when the Thames froze solid and cattle died standing in fields of ice. Others think they were simply expressions of fear, the human need to give a face to the cold. The Great Famine of 1315-1317, caused by relentless cold and rain, devastated Europe. Chroniclers described birds frozen mid-air, bread baked from bark, and cities where even the wealthy shivered. The minstrel shifts the melody again. It's slower now, almost mournful. Someone hums along. Another claps softly in rhythm. The fire crackles, smoke curls upward, and the song seems to spiral with it, rising, thinning, fading into the dark beams above. You notice a tapestry hanging near the hearth, a hunting scene, but up close the figures look tired, their faces pale and still. The wool is brittle from years of heat and smoke, and the colours have faded to ghostly shades. You touch the edge of it, and it feels like dry skin. Once it must have been brilliant, reds, golds, blues. Now it's another memory, another survivor. A servant refills your cup. The mead is thick and warm, tasting of honey and smoke. It slides down like liquid fire. You lean back, feeling it bloom in your chest. The firelight dances on the walls, making them appear to breathe. The dogs curl at your feet, twitching in their sleep. The smell of pine pitch and roasting fat fills the air. Someone at the far end of the hall begins a quiet prayer. Not a formal one, just a murmur for the night's safety. Others fall silent, heads bowed. The flames flicker low, casting long shadows across the faces. For a moment, you can hear nothing but the pop of wood and the faint hiss of snow melting on the roof above. And then, as if the world itself exhales, the hall relaxes. Laughter stirs again. A woman tells another tale, this one about a saint who could talk to the fire, coaxing it to life with her breath. The cook laughs. If she's listening, she says, send her to the kitchen tomorrow. St. Lawrence, patron saint of cooks, was often invoked humorously by medieval kitchen workers, even during meals, for better fire and lighter labour. The sound of laughter warms the air more than the flames ever could. You drink again, the heat spreading through your limbs. The fire seems closer now, its light soft and slow, like the beating of a tired heart. Outside, the snow keeps falling, silent and relentless. Inside, the night stretches, long, smoky, human. The minstrel's song fades, the dogs stop twitching, the last of the mead cools in the cup. Someone yawns, someone sighs, the fire bends low, whispering its last breath of the day. And in that dim, golden hush, you feel it again, that fragile, beautiful thing the castle guards more fiercely than any treasure. The warmth of being alive together, By the middle of the night, the castle has fallen into that peculiar stillness that exists only in deep winter. Not silence exactly, but a dense, living quiet. The kind where even your heartbeat feels too loud. The air has cooled again, the fires burning low, the smoke turning thin and grey. You move through the corridor with a candle, its flame trembling in the draught that seeps through cracks in the stone. Every sound carries far. The soft hiss of the wick, the distant creak of wood settling, the slow drip of water melting from some unseen ledge. The castle itself seems to breathe in sleep. When you pass a window slit, you glimpse the world outside. Snow falling in slow spirals, moonlight pooled on the ground like milk. The courtyard looks frozen in time. Even the trees seem to bow under the weight of it all, their branches glassy and still. You turn and step into the chapel. The door groans softly, as if reluctant to move. Inside it's darker still. A few candles burn before the altar, their light fluttering across the carved stone. The air smells of wax and cold incense. Somewhere high above in the rafters, a pigeon shifts its wings. This is the only place in the castle that feels colder than the walls themselves, yet somehow also gentler. The chill here isn't hostile, it's sacred. You can almost hear prayers still lingering from earlier in the evening woven into the smoke. A priest kneels at the front wrapped in a wool cloak. His voice is low, nearly lost in the vastness of the room. You catch fragments of Latin, words about mercy, about light, about those who endure the darkness. His breath fogs faintly in the candlelight, turning the sacred into something very human. Many medieval chapels were unheated even in winter. Monks and priests often performed matins, the midnight office, in temperatures cold enough for ink to freeze and wax to crack. You sit quietly in one of the back pews. The wood is so cold it bites through your cloak. The sound of prayer folds over you like a blanket, not warm but steady, rhythmic, ancient. After a while the priest finishes, rises and bows. He turns and sees you, smiles faintly, and without a word places a small candle in your hands. You light it from the altar and carry it to the far corner where a single statue stands. Mary, her face soft and pale beneath a crust of frost. You set the candle at her feet. Its flame wavers, catches, then steadies. The light seems impossibly small against all that stone. And yet, as you watch, it fills the chapel with a quiet glow, gentle enough to notice the dust drifting through the air, bright enough to make the shadows soften. It's strange, you think, how the smallest flame can hold its own in a world this cold. The priest whispers something, a blessing maybe, or just a habit of speech, before leaving. The door closes softly behind him. You stay for a while longer, listening to the wax drip, watching the light move. There's a legend among the servants that sometimes on the coldest nights the Virgin herself walks the castle halls, not to protect, but to listen. They say she follows the smoke from dying fires, her bare feet leaving no prints on the frost. Wherever she pauses, the air warms for a heartbeat. Then she's gone again, back into the night. Our Lady of the Hearth, a late medieval legend found in English and French folklore, tells of the Virgin appearing to travellers or castle servants on winter nights, drawn to the smallest lingering fires. You smile faintly at the thought, not because you believe it, but because you understand why they told it. The story is less about miracles than about mercy, about believing that something kind still walks the earth, even when the world feels frozen. You stand, stretch your stiff limbs, and step back into the corridor. The air outside the chapel feels warmer now, though it's just as cold as before. The candle in your hand burns low, its wax dripping onto your glove. As you pass the stairwell, you hear a sound, faint, rhythmic. Someone is hammering softly below. You follow it down to the kitchens where a lone servant is tending the hearth. He's building up the fire for dawn, carefully stacking logs, coaxing the embers with a bellows. His hands move with a kind of care usually reserved for prayer. He looks up briefly, nods, then goes back to work. You stand nearby, watching the flame take shape. The logs crackle, smoke curls upward, and the kitchen slowly fills with light. "Never let it go out," he murmurs, half to himself. "The whole house dies when the fire dies." A cold hearth is a cursed hearth, an English proverb recorded in the 15th century, reflecting the superstition that a fire's extinction could bring misfortune to the household. You watch until the first hint of dawn seeps through the narrow window. The sky outside is pale grey, like the inside of a pearl. The servant sets another log on the fire and yawns, stretching his back. The flame catches, bright and steady. You realize then that this quiet tending of light, is the castle's true prayer. Not the words spoken in the chapel, not the Latin drifting through the cold, but this, a human hand keeping the dark at bay. You leave him there with his fire and step once more into the corridor. The world is still grey, still silent, but the smoke from the chimney has begun to rise again, a thin line of life written against the winter sky. The dawn comes reluctantly, dragging light like an old cloak across the castle. You can tell it's morning only because the black has softened to blue. The snow outside the windows glows faintly, reflecting what little sun exists. The whole world feels muffled, a silence thick as cloth. In the great hall the fire's been rebuilt. It's smaller now, trimmed to last the day. A few servants warm their hands, faces pale and still. One yawns, another stifles a cough. The cook mutters that the frost has crept back into the stores. The barrels of salted fish have frozen solid again. The castle's rhythms begin anew. Water hauled, fires fed, straw changed, prayers mumbled, boots scraped. It's strange how routine becomes a defence. The body moves even when the spirit would rather not. You follow the smell of something sharp and sour to the pantry, where vinegar hangs heavy in the air. A boy is soaking cloths in it, humming to himself. "For the feet," he says, stops the chill from creeping up. He wrings one out and ties it around his ankle. The smell makes your eyes water. Vinegar compresses were a common medieval remedy for frostbite or numb limbs, believed to restore circulation. Records from monastic infirmaries list vinegar, mustard, and hot wine as standard treatments for winter ailments. You step outside for a moment into the courtyard. The brightness blinds you. Everything is white upon white. The air cuts at your lungs, and every sound, a shovel scrape, a door creak, feels sharpened. Frost clings to every iron hinge and nail. Even the crows look cold, puffed up and silent on the battlements. Some of the soldiers are clearing snow from the well. Their breath plumes in the air as they work. One curses, another laughs. They tell stories to keep their spirits up, a chain of voices passing through the cold. One mentions a village downriver where the water froze in the pipes, trapping a goose inside. "Still honking even in the ice," he says, and the others roar with laughter. The sound rolls across the courtyard, bright against the grey. It's laughter like survival. Rough, absurd, necessary. You walk along the wall, where the view stretches out into the winter fields. The river below is a silver ribbon of ice. Beyond it the forest glimmers, trunks black, branches white, everything still. You imagine the peasants' cottages huddled in the distance, their thatched roofs buried under snow. There, warmth is a rarer luxury. A guard joins you on the wall, his face wrapped in cloth. "Too quiet this morning," he says. Even the foxes are hiding. He squints at the horizon. They say when it's this cold, the wolves come down from the hills. You nod. It's not a threat so much as a reminder that even the wild feels the cold. Survival, everywhere, is negotiation. He pulls his cloak tighter. My mother used to say that frost is the devil's handwriting. He signs the world every winter just to remind us he's still there. He chuckles softly at the memory. She'd hang iron scissors by the door to keep him out. In parts of northern Europe, people hung iron tools near windows or doors in winter to ward off frost spirits or devils. The practice likely mixed pagan and Christian protective charms. A gust of wind rises suddenly, swirling snow across the wall. The guard curses, you laugh, and for a moment the two of you share a look, the quiet agreement of those who know the same enemy. Back inside, the kitchen is alive again. The smell of bread fills the air, thick and yeasty. A tray of small loaves sits by the fire, their crusts cracked from the heat. You tear one open. Steam escapes, carrying the scent of wheat and smoke. It's simple, coarse, and perfect. You eat slowly, letting the warmth spread. Around you people talk, of firewood, of repairs, of rumours. One of the servants mentions that the river might thaw early this year. Another shakes her head. Never trust February, she says. It smiles with teeth. February smiles with teeth was a common English proverb in the 15th century, warning of deceptive early thaws. You smile too because you understand. The castle lives by the rhythm of such sayings, half warning, half comfort. Each winter teaches the same lesson. Endurance is built from habit, from laughter, from superstition, from shared breath. The hall fills slowly with light, the kind that doesn't warm but still feels like mercy. The smoke rises straight upward now. The wind has quieted. You look around. The weary faces, the trembling hands, the small signs of life. Bread, fire, voice, motion. These are the things that keep a castle alive, even when its walls are frozen and its gods are silent. Outside the sun climbs higher, pale but present. The snow on the roof begins to melt drop by drop, the sound like distant rain. Somewhere a bell rings, not for prayer this time, but for work, and the castle breathes again. By midday, the cold sharpens again. The sun, pale and distant, spills across the battlements without warmth. The snow in the courtyard glitters like powdered glass. Somewhere in the distance a raven croaks, a rough, lonely sound that feels older than the castle itself. Inside, the rhythm of daily endurance continues. Servants carry buckets of slush, their boots leaving wet trails on the flagstones. The smell of smoke seeps through every corridor. The air tastes faintly of iron and ash. You find yourself drawn toward the small infirmary, a corner chamber tucked beneath the chapel stairs. Inside, the air is thick with vinegar, honey, and something faintly medicinal, like crushed herbs. A healer kneels beside a straw pallet, wrapping a man's hands in cloth soaked with hot wine. His fingers are red and cracked, trembling slightly. "Frostbite," she says softly, not looking up. "The wells froze again last night." Monastic infirmaries in the 13th and 14th centuries often treated frostbite with warm wine, vinegar or mustard poultices. Medical texts like the Taquinum Sanitatis advised avoiding sudden heat, believing the spirit of the limb might flee if shocked. She pours the last of the wine onto the cloth, wrings it out, and binds his hand again. The man doesn't flinch. He simply watches the steam rise and vanish. "Does it help?" you ask. She smiles faintly. "Sometimes. Mostly it passes the time." The room is lined with shelves. Jars filled with herbs, powders, bits of bone, and dried roots hanging from strings. Every inch smells of effort, as if the air itself has been boiled down to its essence. In one corner sits a small bowl of salt and charcoal, not for medicine, but for protection. The healer notices your gaze. "Against bad air," she says, though her tone carries the weight of superstition. Or worse things. Historians still debate whether medieval people truly understood contagion or simply feared corruption. They burned incense not to cure but to sanctify the air, to make it morally clean, if not physically safe. You move toward the window. Outside, the world looks endless, a white sheet pinned beneath the grey sky. But inside, every sound feels trapped. The bubbling of the pot, the rustling of cloth, the slow breath of the wounded man. A cat sits on the windowsill, tail curled around its paws, watching the snow. Its fur gleams in the light. "We call her Saint Cat," the healer says. "She keeps the mice from the herbs." Then, lowering her voice, "and the ghosts from the sick beds." Cats were sometimes considered guardians of the soul during illness. In some regions, they were believed to absorb or sense death before it came. The man on the pallet stirs, whispering something. The healer presses a finger to his lips. "Sleep," she murmurs. "The worst cold is in the mind." When you leave, the warmth of the chamber clings to your clothes. The corridors outside seem colder than before, as if the castle itself resents your brief escape from its chill. You descend the stairs toward the cellar. The smell changes, from smoke to damp earth, from life to storage. Barrels line the walls, stacked with salted meat and ale. The air down here is thick and wet, echoing faintly with dripping water. The flicker of your torch reveals frost creeping along the barrels like silver veins. A worker is checking the salting vats, breaking the crust with a mallet. The sound rings sharp. "You have to keep it moving," he says without looking up. "If the brine freezes, the meat spoils." He gestures to a row of clay jugs filled with lard. "We burn the fat when the candles run low." Tallow, sweat, bones. Nothing goes to waste. His voice is practical, resigned. You realize that down here, survival is measured not in warmth, but in decay delayed. In late medieval castles, candle making and food preservation shared ingredients. Rendered fat was used for both tallow candles and cooking, blurring the line between sustenance and light. When you climb back up, the light has shifted. It's afternoon again, though the sun never quite appears. The walls gleam faintly, sweating with meltwater. Somewhere above, someone is singing. A thin, wavering tune, the kind used to keep rhythm while working. You pause by a window slit. Outside, the snow has stopped. The fields are white, the sky pale and trembling with light. Smoke curls gently from the chimneys, fragile threads against the sky. And you think, for the 100th time, how fragile it all is. The fire, the breath, the faith that spring will come again. The people here live not against the cold, but within it, as if winter were a vast cathedral and they, the silent congregation. You breathe in. The air tastes of smoke and salt and something faintly sweet. The ghost of warmth, lingering where it's least expected. By late afternoon, the air begins to change again, not warmer, but softer, like a sigh after holding breath too long. The snow has stopped. Thin fingers of sunlight stretch through the arrow slits, painting the walls gold for the first time in days. In the courtyard, the icicles drip in slow rhythm, each drop falling like a tiny bell. Inside the hall, preparations begin for the evening meal. The castle has survived another day. That alone is worth celebrating. The servants move quickly now, their motions practiced, efficient. Someone sweeps the rushes, replacing the dirtiest with new bundles of dried herbs and straw. The scent of rosemary and lavender rises faintly, mixing with smoke and tallow. The effect is almost luxurious, an illusion of cleanliness. Rushings were renewed several times a year, often mixed with herbs like lavender, mint and sage to mask odours and deter fleas. The sweet smell of new rushes became a symbol of hospitality and status. The tables are set again, though the food is simple. Barley bread, onions, a pot of boiled fish, and small cakes flavoured with honey. The cook has managed to scrape together something from the week's stores. A servant carries in a jug of ale, its surface flecked with bubbles. You take a seat near the hearth. The fire burns lower tonight, smaller, steadier. It's no longer a fight against cold, but a conversation, a rhythm between breath and flame. The Lord enters, his fur-lined cloak trailing behind him. He looks tired, though his voice is warm when he greets the room. The steward murmurs a blessing in Latin, his words slow and careful, like a thread binding everyone together. As the meal begins, talk drifts about the weather, about the stores, about rumours from other estates. Someone mentions Candlemas approaching, the feast that marks the halfway point of winter. The very name carries light in it. By Candlemas, one man says, the candles must be blessed, or else spring will not return. Another laughs. Spring always returns, whether we bless it or not. The laughter fades gently, replaced by the crackle of the fire. Candlemas, celebrated on February 2nd, marked both the purification of Mary and the symbolic end of winter darkness. In many castles, households brought their year's candles to the chapel to be blessed, a ritual of both light and endurance. The cook brings out a surprise, a pie baked in an iron pot, steam spilling from its crust. Inside, the smell of apples and spice escapes, sharp and sweet. Apples in winter are rare. A murmur of delight passes through the hall. Someone jokes that the cook must have bribed the saints themselves for fruit. As everyone eats, the conversation grows easier. The servants tell stories of old Candlemas nights, of bonfires lit on the hills, of farmers walking fields with candles to bless the soil beneath the snow. One swears that in her village they burned the last Yule log that night, its ashes mixed into next year's seeds for luck. In rural Europe, remnants of the Yule log were often kept until Candlemas and scattered in the fields as protection against blight, a fusion of pagan and Christian rites. You can almost see it, the glow of hilltop fires, the snow lit from within, the faint smell of smoke carried across the valleys. Midwinter promise that life will return. Here, inside the castle, the same hope flickers in quieter ways, in the warmth of breath, in laughter shared between spoonfuls, in the faint gleam of wax candles that will burn till morning. Historians still debate whether Candlemas truly marked a turning point in the medieval calendar, or simply a ritual illusion, a way to convince weary hearts that winter was breaking. But perhaps that illusion was enough. The mind needs its own fire. The Lord stands and raises his cup. To light, he says simply. Everyone echoes him, voices soft but steady. For a moment, the hall feels alive with something greater than warmth, gratitude, perhaps, or just relief. You sip your ale, the sweetness of honey clinging to your tongue. The fire crackles. Outside, the snow reflects the last of the sun, and for once the light lingers a little longer before surrendering to night. It's hard to tell if the day is truly getting longer, or if everyone has simply learned to believe that it must. But belief here is as real as any flame. Night again. the 14th in this long, unbroken stretch of frost. The castle exhales in silence, walls creaking softly, fires sighing down to their hearts. You walk slowly through the outer passage, your breath blooming white in the air. The scent of wood smoke clings to your cloak. Above, the rafters hum faintly with wind. Somewhere far off, the stable horses shift in their sleep, hooves clicking against frozen straw. The world has narrowed to the rhythm of embers and echoes. You pause at the window, slit overlooking the frozen moat. The surface gleams under the moon like beaten glass. It's said that when the water freezes this thick, it traps sound. That voices, prayers and cries from months past lie sleeping beneath the ice until spring. In parts of medieval Scandinavia and northern England, it was thought that frozen lakes and moats held winter voices, released when the thaw came. The superstition survived in some 16th century parish writings. It's a strange comfort that the cold doesn't erase things, only holds them in suspension. The same could be said for people, you think. In the great hall, the hearth is still alive, though small. A few figures linger near it, soldiers half asleep, a washerwoman darning by the light, her fingers red and raw. A dog lies curled by her feet, occasionally twitching in a dream. You sit opposite her, and she smiles faintly without stopping her work. "It's always quietest before the thaw," she says, "but that's when the ice is weakest too." Her needle flashes in the firelight like a star. My mother used to listen for cracks in the river, said it was the sound of winter dying. The fire pops suddenly, throwing a shower of sparks. Both of you laugh softly, startled but grateful for something to break the stillness. You look at the dog, his fur singed faintly at the edges, and say, "He seems braver than most knights I've met." She chuckles. "He's cleverer too." The sound of your laughter drifts upward into the rafters, where it dissolves into the hush. Outside, the moon is brighter now, an icy lantern hanging low above the battlements. You step out briefly into the courtyard. The cold hits you full in the face, the kind that burns, not bites. The sky is clear, the stars sharp as needles. For a moment you imagine how this would have looked 1,000 years before. The same stars, the same cold, the same firelight leaking from narrow windows. Time here doesn't move so much as circle. You walk toward the outer wall, where the snow lies untouched. The torchlight from the gate flickers across the ground, catching the faint marks of boots, cartwheels and paw prints. Each one feels like a sentence in a story that keeps being rewritten. Near the stables you find an old man repairing a saddle by lantern light. His breath fogs in front of him, his hands steady despite the chill. "Doesn't your back ache?" you ask. He chuckles. "It stopped aching 20 winters ago. The cold takes the pain before the priest does." He lifts the lantern to study the stitching. Leather behaves better in the cold. It remembers its shape. Medieval tanners and saddlers often preferred to work leather in cool temperatures. The animal hide stiffened slightly, allowing for cleaner stitching before being softened again near the heat. He gestures toward the stars. They say if you count 7 bright ones and name them before dawn, spring will come sooner. You smile. Do you believe that? He shrugs. "I believe the sky likes attention. Maybe that's enough." You stand together in silence for a while. The castle looms behind you, ancient and half asleep. Beyond its walls lies a vastness that feels both empty and alive. Somewhere, wolves call, long, mournful notes that seem to blend with the wind itself. When you finally return inside, the hall feels warmer, almost intimate. A few candles still burn, puddles of wax gathering at their bases. You notice that someone has drawn a small circle of salt on the floor near the door, a charm against evil spirits. or perhaps against the cold itself. Circles of salt were commonly used in late medieval households to bind spirits or misfortune, a practice blending old pagan charms with Christian blessing rituals. You sit again by the dying fire. The last log has split down the middle, glowing from within. You watch as it collapses into ember and ash, the light dimming but never truly gone. You think of the people around you, their endless tending, mending, believing. The healer's steady hands, the servant's laughter, the priest's frozen prayers, the child's bare feet by the hearth. 1,000 small defences against the same cold. The night deepens. Somewhere a bell tolls once. Slow, hollow, almost tender. The dog sighs in his sleep. The woman finishes her sewing and folds her work neatly beside her. The silence that follows is vast but not empty. It feels like waiting, not for warmth, but for the moment when the first crack of thaw will sound beneath the ice. Winter has begun to loosen its grip, not in triumph, but in exhaustion. The frost is thinner now, the light less cruel. When you step outside, the snow no longer crunches underfoot, it sighs. The air carries the faintest scent of earth, like something old remembering how to breathe. You walk through the courtyard, past the well, past the empty stables, and notice that the icicles dripping from the eaves are shorter today. Each drop of meltwater falls with a patient rhythm, tapping like a clock marking the slow return of time. In the kitchen, the fire burns gently. The cook stands over a pot of porridge, humming an old tune. She pauses to lift a spoon, tastes, and nods with satisfaction. "It's good," she says. "The oats came from last year's store. We've just enough until the next harvest." The tone of her voice carries relief more than joy. She adds a handful of dried berries from a small pouch. "For colour," she says, smiling faintly. "If your eyes believe spring is near, the rest of you might follow." During late winter, medieval kitchens often ran short on preserved food. Dried berries, honey, or herbs were added not for nutrition but for morale, a visual promise that colour would return to life soon. You take a seat by the hearth. The room smells of smoke, oats, and wood resin. A child wanders in half asleep, dragging a rough wool blanket, hair tangled, eyes still soft with dreams. She sits near the fire and stares at it the way one watches rain. Her mother tucks the blanket tighter and murmurs a prayer under her breath, not Latin, but something older and smaller. Outside, the castle stirs awake again. You hear shovels scraping, boots thudding, distant voices. The day feels different. The light, though weak, seems to stretch further into every corner. When you pass through the great hall, you find the steward counting candles, small stubs stacked in rows. He looks up, sighs, and says, "Enough to last until the equinox if we're careful." He turns one of the candles over in his hand, the wax flecked with ash. "It's strange," he says quietly. "You spend half your life chasing light, and then, when it comes, you miss the quiet that came before." You nod. It's true. The cold made everything clearer, sharper, more deliberate. Every act meant survival. Now, with the promise of thaw, life begins to scatter again into noise and motion. The intimacy of hardship is ending. You walk out toward the ramparts. The sun has risen fully now, pale gold against the white landscape. A single stream of meltwater trickles down the wall, carving a path through frost. In it floats a dead leaf, carried slowly along like a tiny ship. A pair of ravens perch on the tower, their black feathers glinting blue in the light. They croak to each other, hopping awkwardly on the parapet. You remember the story one of the soldiers told. that ravens guard the gates of winter, and when they leave their perch, the season's spell breaks. In Celtic and Norse traditions, ravens were seen as messengers between worlds, life and death, winter and spring. Their flight at the end of winter was often read as an omen of renewal. The wind shifts, carrying a new sound, the faint trickle of thawing streams somewhere beyond the castle walls. It's almost too soft to believe, the kind of sound that could be mistaken for imagination. You close your eyes and listen. Beneath the dripping roofs and creaking wood you hear it again, running water, patient and certain. Inside, bells begin to ring for morning prayer. The echoes move through the stone like breath through a sleeping body. Servants cross themselves, stretch, and begin their chores. The priest will thank God for deliverance, but you suspect the people thank the sun. You think of all that's endured within these walls, the hunger, the numb fingers, the superstition, the stubborn laughter. 100 nights of smoke and silence, each one carrying the same fragile defiance, to light a fire, to say a prayer, to keep moving. You stand for a while longer, watching the sun spread slowly over the snow. The light feels thin but alive. It touches the walls, the courtyard, the faces of those who step out to greet the day. You realize then that the miracle isn't warmth, it's continuity. The refusal to let the world fall still. The castle has survived the winter, but more than that, it has remembered itself. Every crack, every echo, every flame has been part of the same long, slow heartbeat. You take one last look at the snowfields, now streaked with gold. The ravens lift into the air, wings cutting across the light. Their shadows sweep the wall and vanish. And in that moment you know, the story of winter isn't about endurance alone. It's about faith in return, that after darkness, there is always something worth waiting for. And now, as you lie there, perhaps under your own blanket instead of a fur cloak, you can still feel the echo of that ancient castle breathing through you. The chill on the stone, the softness of smoke in the air, the faint hum of life fighting the cold. Somewhere deep down you share the same rhythm, that quiet heartbeat of endurance. Maybe your world doesn't have torchlight or frostbitten walls, but it has its own winters, the kind you carry inside, the ones that whisper doubts or draw you into stillness. Yet even there, something glows, a candle, a thought, a memory of warmth you once knew. So if tonight feels heavy, let it. Let the silence stretch and the world fall dim. Because the story always ends the same way, not in endless cold, but in thaw. The people of that old castle didn't survive because they were strong. They survived because they believed that the light would return, even when they couldn't see it yet. So breathe. Feel the air moving softly in your chest. The night will pass, the dawn will come, and when it does, you'll remember, just as they did, that you too were built for the turning of seasons. Good night, traveller. Rest in your quiet fortress. The fire will hold till morning.